The hand of God. He came among us in my second year of secondary school as a replacement for old Gerard Meehan, who had fallen ill. The new teacher was a large man, and he stood at the top of the class and said by way of introduction, "I'm Brother Bannister, the teacher of mathematics and religious instruction." There was something inarguable in Bannister, a sense of purpose to him that we intuitively recognised. He immediately dispensed with our place in maths under Meehan's tutelage, and told us that he would be beginning the subject anew. Just 10 minutes went by. Bannister was informing us about Venn diagrams. He was drawing an example on the board on its left-hand side. It was a wide blackboard, extending almost the width of the top of the classroom. Bannister was holding the chalk to the surface of the board, and then suddenly he wasn't there. At the moment he disappeared from view, I remembered feeling a breeze on the side of my face. It lasted a second. After that I heard a slap and a howl. I looked behind, and there was Bannister, in the bottom left-hand corner of the classroom, slapping Noel Murray across the head. There was a second slap and then a third. I looked at the blackboard at the place where Bannister had been. The only evidence to suggest that he had been standing there a few seconds earlier was a small piece of chalk lying on the ground. I looked behind again, and there he was, still striking Murray across the neck and shoulders. I asked myself, how could he have made it from one point in the classroom to the other so quickly? I hadn't seen him move, and he had made no sound, yet he was now behind me. That's what was on my mind as I watched him haul Murray up to the top of the classroom, to take 3 across each hand, after which Bannister berated Murray and then all of us. He would not be tolerating any tomfoolery. I will always remember that first day, not only because of Bannister's dramatic entrance into our lives, but because of the effect he had on our class. During the break between classes there was no talk or laughter. The class was silent. Teddy Healy seemed to act and speak for us all when he went to the place beside the blackboard where Bannister had been, and then looking down at where Murray was sitting and still smarting, asked, "But how did he do it? One second he was here, the next he wasn't. He was down there." Like a number of other boys, I shook my head in disbelief. How could Bannister, or any human for that matter, move so quickly? Then I remembered the breeze as Bannister disappeared from view. I felt it on my face. I think he went right over me, I declare. Immediately after I said this, I looked at the other boys to see what their reaction would be. I thought they were going to shout me down, but before anyone did, Cotter, a boy who sat in the 4th line 2 places from the top, echoed what I said. I think I felt him too, overhead, but I can't be sure. I never actually saw anything. In the months that followed, no one spoke out of turn or misbehaved in any of Bannister's classes. We were all too afraid. Then at the end of February, Bannister demonstrated his powers again. He swept across the classroom over the rows of seats and chairs and pounded Fleming, a quiet boy. Once again a silence of confusion and fear faced us like a ghost at the end of the class. There were the usual questions. How had Bannister got from one point in the classroom to the other so quickly? How did he manage it? Had he powers, as we called them? Murray, Bannister's first victim, was the only boy who sustained a note of dissidence and hope. He arrived at a theory that ran counter to the suspicion that was now gripping us all. According to Murray, Bannister crossed the classroom by jumping up and running across the tops of the desks. "That's how he does it," said Murray, and added, "I saw him myself." We didn't believe him. We asked where was his proof. Since the floor of our classroom was not exactly clean, we should see Bannister's footprints on the table, or even on some of our books and copies that were open on the desktop. Murray conceded that our counter-argument was plausible. So we looked the time Fleming was beaten, and over the following few weeks on 4 separate occasions when others, Ryan, Murphy, Leahy and Fitz, were each beaten. Each time we found no evidence of shoe prints, either on the desktops or on our copybooks. We found nothing that would support Murray's reasonable but unpopular theory. Once Ash Wednesday had passed and we were into Lent proper, there was a change in Bannister's form, and it began to happen regularly. The least thing made him hop up into the classroom sky and descend on some poor misfortune who had been attempting to remain anonymous. Being at the back or in the middle of the class behind a tall boy or a fat boy was no defence. By the end of March, more than half the class, including yours truly, had been beaten, some more severely than others. Murray, to his misfortune the most times, 7 by the Easter holidays. Each time, after a beating, we would return to the controversial subject. How did Bannister do what he did? Did he have translocation powers? If so, what was the nature of this? Who was responsible for it? And of course, was there any defence? Many theories had now arisen, running the gamut from Murray's realistic explanation to George O'Brien's elegant hand of God view. This theory, which I subscribe to, based itself on the notion that the hand of God came through the classroom ceiling to lift up Bannister and set him down again alongside a boy he wanted to beat. The hand of God theory grew in popularity as Easter drew close, and the beatings became regular and systematic. Now we expected that someone would get it every day. We had Bannister for at least one class each day, so he had plenty of opportunity. Amid the rising terror, which caused plenty of aggro among us boys, I might add, Murray was the only one who put forward some arguments of reason. He raised the matter of the breeze. This was a regular feature of Bannister's translocatory movements. If one drew a line from the point where Bannister had been, used a chalk mark on the ground, to the point where he ended up, used the head of the particular child he was beating, then one would always find a number of boys along that line who would say, "I felt a breeze just when he disappeared." According to Murray, this wouldn't happen if God was involved. Murray had a point. We were agreed on that. But the view taken by the class was that, while it raised doubts, it didn't disprove the hand of God theory. George O'Brien argued that the breeze was actually God's hand moving through the air over our heads, getting ready to snatch Bannister into action. In any case, it was one of those things that couldn't be proved one way or the other. We learned to live with this doubt until finally, a fortnight after Easter, the evidence needed to resolve the matter materialised in a most painful manner. Once again Murray was the victim, but he was so delighted with the outcome being proved right after all. For once he didn't complain about the pain. The occasion was almost identical to that first day, except that this time we were doing basic geometry. Bannister, always the one to explain an idea with an example, was up at the blackboard drawing a parallelogram. He seemed unconcerned by anything other than the size and shape of this parallelogram until suddenly, without warning, he disappeared. His chalk fell to the ground. The position he previously occupied became empty. Then we heard someone being clattered across the face. However, this time something new happened to me. In that split second between when Bannister disappeared from view and we heard the sound of the first slap across Murray's face, I let out a yelp and pulled my hand to my chest. Bannister marched to the top of the room, then came across one row and walked towards me. "What is it, McCarthy?" he shouted. Before I had time to think or even consider the implications of what I was saying, I blurted out, "You stepped on my fingers." I showed him, and indeed my middle and index finger were already red, crushed by the heel of his shoe. "They'll be fine," said Bannister, and returned to finish off Murray. The hand of God theory now collapsed into pieces. Temporarily, my injured fingers unleashed a wave of reason. Murray became an instant hero, and despite the fact that the hand of God supporters tried a rearguard action, saying God dropped Brother Bannister in error, in reality it was the end for them. In the weeks that followed, a new round of speculation and theorising took hold in our class. Now that Bannister had been stripped of his heavenly aura, there was less room for extravagance. The idea for a new investigation emerged. This proposal, led by the now resurgent Murray, involved comparing Bannister with other angry people we knew, mostly Gardaí and orchard owners. Our hope was to gain some new understanding of Bannister's anger and how it influenced his lightning movements. Were there any particular triggers? How did Bannister become so angry so fast? We watched and studied, but when no new information was discovered, the class turned to another matter that was becoming increasingly obvious to us all, the matter of Bannister's form. I would never have described Brother Bannister as a happy-looking man, but if on the occasion of an assault his before and after form were compared, then it could clearly be shown that in the after period he smiled more. This improvement would not be remarkable, but still, in comparison with the pre-assault period, it would be noteworthy. Wasn't this a phenomenon to be explained? How or in what way did it fit into the overall picture? As always, we had no real answers, just theories. The most popular one I recall was from a quiet boy whose name I now forget. He advanced the idea that Brother Bannister enjoyed hitting us. When this boy first stated his view, it was followed, it should be said, by a deathly silence. Then everyone laughed. But it hit home more than we ever realised. Because when Bannister next assaulted one of us, we watched with particular attention for how he looked and behaved. And the evidence was incontrovertible. Bannister walked away from his victim as if he had just met the Pope. Bannister's assaults continued apace during the remaining days of April and for most of May. I recall other matters taking hold of our reasoning power, the nature of Bannister's first and second strikes, the firmness of his clatter, which led one boy to speculate that he had once been an inter-county hurler. In any case, for all the theorising that we engaged in, we never succeeded in coming to any definitive understanding of Bannister or his raison d'etre. Instead, abruptly, on the second last Friday of the school year, the final development unfolded. At the end of our maths class, uncharacteristically, Bannister sat down in his chair and began ordering the books in his bag. When he had completed this, he looked up and announced that our normal teacher, Meehan, was well enough to return to duty. In order to facilitate his transition back to work, Meehan requested that he be allowed to take all his classes for the remaining week of the final term, which was the week beginning on the following Monday. I recall the expression on Bannister's face when he made this announcement. He looked sad.